morning. I'm Anne-Marie, and this is Craig, in case there was any confusion for those of you who've not been fully caffeinated. And it's really a pleasure to be here with you today and with all of you. I'm honored to have been invited. So a question that a lot of people have about this session is, why are we talking about this? With all the things we could talk to you about, with the incredible business you created, which is now celebrating its 20th anniversary, why are we here talking about journalism? And I think as a way of explaining that, can we start with Mr. Shulsky?
In AP history class, in high school, I'd say in 1970, I had a really good AP history teacher, and he impressed upon me the importance of the Bill of Rights and that of a free, trustworthy press. That was a big deal for the country to survive. 5 years ago, this was actually at a festival in Colorado then, suddenly that coalesced, and on a panel, I blurted out that a free press is the immune system of democracy. And that was memorialized by James Fallow from the Atlantic, who was more impressed that I had an understated sense of humor like Bob Newhart. So while he memorialized what I thought was a significant statement, what Jon Stewart thought was significant, I'm more pleased that he said I was the Bob Newhart of the internet. And before that I was saying I was the Forrest Gump of the internet. Bob Newhart is better. The deal is, especially in this political environment, we need accurate, trustworthy information to make any kind of decisions. That is, good people of goodwill need to be told straight information.
So earlier this month, Craig, you wrote a piece that I think was titled "When I Got My Philanthropic Act Together." Okay. And in it, you recollect this moment, I think, in 2000, where you said you'd been convinced by your colleagues that you weren't a very good manager, and it was time to focus at the company on customer service, but it also gave you time to start thinking about your priorities outside of that. And you came up with a short list, and journalism was on that list. So when you have that idea, how do you go about affecting that? Journalism's a really big word, and it means a lot of things. So when you think back to that time, how did you think about how you were going to attack that?
There's a bunch of questions in there, and I want to be careful not to conflate 2 years and decisions. So 99, need to make it into a real company. I make a very annoying decision that I don't need to make $1 billion. No one needs to make $1 billion as far as I'm concerned. And so we constitute the company as we do, and I'm leading it. I'm an engineer, and I get old school, seriously old school nerd, 1950s style. You know, plastic pocket protector, thick black glasses, and no instincts for social norms or conventions. Even at this very moment, I should add, I am simulating social behavior. It's the best I could do. Last night, I believe I had to do it for 4 hours, so I had to bring in my stunt social media double. That, by the way, was new material. Somebody please write it down so I can remember it, because I don't have writers. Okay, so then the idea is that in 2000, people helped me understand that as a manager, I suck. Got Jim Buckmaster to run it. He has done a much better job than I would have done. I went into pretty intense customer service. You got a lot of abuse doing customer service, wherever you're doing it. So a few years ago, I gave myself the luxury of doing lightweight customer service. At the same time, I realized that for 10 years, I had been doing, I'd been doing a lot of public service and philanthropy. So I would just dive into that much more. I figured at that point I was helping out 20 or 30 nonprofits. A friend listed them for me, and the list hit around 100. So I got some people together, hired some folks like Rad Campaign, out of Washington, and they are very big in women who tech. So they helped me get things together, focus this craigconnects.org thing on areas that I would really seriously focus on a lot, some that I would focus on seriously when needed, and some that I would just do on a whim. On a whim, for example, I now support the Pigeon Rescue Group in San Francisco. There are recent pictures of me in Facebook on this. I'm on the fence regarding adopting a couple pigeons because I need to be more eccentric, although Mrs. Newmark has vetoed this. You'll see pictures, and you'll see the pigeons are wearing pigeon pants, but they didn't get them on fast enough the first time. But the deal is that I started helping out nonprofits and government agencies using the limited resources that I have that they need. The biggest one they need, frankly, is on social media. Now, for a nerd to be advising on social media is a crime against nature. But let's say for someone not in the business, for an outsider, I know a certain amount, and since the bar is so low, I would never bill my hours, but there are people billing hours with less skills. So to these nonprofits that I believe in, government agencies, particularly Veterans Affairs, I just stand up for them. They'll post something and I'll say, hey, this is good, and I'll retweet or put it on Facebook or whatever, and that seems to help a little bit. There's challenges, because I'm telling every nonprofit and every government agency they should ask their fans and members to share everything on social media too, short of spamming, because I think, well, that's the only way I can think of actually getting viral activity to occur. So with Craig Connects, two big areas, veterans and military families. Like I'm on the board of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, the board of Vets in Tech, which helps vets get jobs in the technology industry. There's a bunch of other things, connections, works pretty well, but I think our focus is on my project where, well, I'm a news consumer, not in the business, not going to tell anyone how to do their job, but I want to be able to read news I can trust. And there are sources of that. ProPublica, the New Yorker, the whole Stewart clan, with congratulations, for example, for John Oliver, who may have found the perfect format. And I'm trying to help people who have a chance at restoring trustworthy journalism in a big way. And I looked at the fact-checking stuff like PolitiFact, the Center for Public Integrity. I'm on that board also. And not a lot of boards, but some focused ones. And I've given up on the fact-checking stuff, at least as a standalone kind of thing. I've now located something called the Trust Project.
So talk about that a little bit with Richard Gingras and some others.
Yeah, the deal here is that Santa Clara University, which anchors the southern end of Silicon Valley, they have the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics. So they're doing serious stuff about not only, well, about ethics in a number of areas, particularly internet business. And they also have a digital journalism ethics organization. And what happened was that I read about them on Medium. And basically they were talking about coming up with a number of ways that news outlets or journalists could say, you know, this article contains trustworthy information. For example, there could be a link to a good code of ethics, maybe related to the work done by the Society for Professional Journalists or the Online News Association. And then they could also have a link to maybe a dispute resolution system. So the idea is that they're at least committing to good faith in trustworthy behavior. The devil's in the details, because you can commit to trustworthy behavior, never intending to do it. But if you at least commit to it, that's a first step. So you're making a promise to your readers. The second part of this, and this was suggested by Jeff Jarvis, and he's at City University in New York. And he said, well, since the Trust Project people are already working with Richard Gingers from Google News, it would be nice if as Google News ranked news articles, it could score more highly articles where they promise to do things like fact-checking and to behave ethically. So instead of a stick, instead of criticism, give people that reward and rank things a little more highly. That makes sense to me. We're already working on getting allies for different things. They're keeping in mind the 2016 elections and all that. I'm keeping my distance a bit, acting as a cheerleader. That's my primary role. Because I gotta respect the boundary. I'm not a news professional. Here we have a bunch of news professionals who are trying to change the news industry in a way, I guess, which is really patriotic, considering the election coming up.
One of the things that Richard and his partner, Sally Lehrman, say in their organizing principles about the Trust Project is the voices of quality journalism command neither the respect nor credibility that they expect and truly deserve. I want to ask you about that deserving part.
Deserving, that's a value statement. And the idea is that there are people who value quality journalism, a prerequisite of which is, well, in quality journalism, I feel you don't get lied to. I'm pretty simple-minded, and I can forgive the occasional lapses. People are under a lot of pressure in the news business. If you're on a site where you have to produce several articles a day, and where no one else is bothering to check their facts, there's a lot of pressure on you, because you don't want to lose your job. So that's it. I just want to see that kind of thing, given the realities of journalism today.
So 20 years ago, when Craigslist was becoming a thing that wasn't just sort of a private listserv for you and your friends, it was emails you used to send around telling people about, I think mostly it was arts kind of happenings, theater, maybe a couple of other things that interested you. And it now became this thing that everybody knows as Craigslist. But at that time, I was managing editor of the Chicago Tribune. And something else was going on in our business at the same time, and it was being largely impacted by what would become Craigslist. When that was happening, did you have any notion about how disruptive that was going to be to that industry?
Well, I have to challenge the idea that it was disruptive. That's been debunked several times within the last couple of weeks by an article by Mark Purton, and also some work done jointly, well, when you combine the numbers from Pew Trusts and a study done at NYU Stern, which shows very different numbers. I'm not smart enough to analyze the numbers because I've forgotten all of my statistical analysis. I used to be smart and could do math. I'm completely serious about that statement. Statistics was like 40 years ago for me. But especially this latest article pointed out that in the most critical period, roughly 2000 through 2007, newspapers were still making a lot of money. And then you could read the rest of it from there. Aside from that, your second question there, the explicit question, whatever effect we've had in any regards, because we have made the lives easier of some tens of millions of people, that I had no idea, had no clue, very happy for it to be happening, and just then committed to making it happen more. And the deal too is that our site helps people put food on the table, helps them get a job, helps them find a place to live so they can put the table into something where they can put the food. And that ain't bad. And the other work I'm doing, this public service stuff and the journalism stuff, and for that matter, the pigeon rescue stuff, all serves these ends.
Yeah, so we can debate the word disruptive, but clearly there was a new model that newspapers have been very dependent on an old model that hadn't changed much since Gutenberg, and a new one comes along that they did not sufficiently foresee or capture. And so there were a lot of changes that came out of that. And so if you think about that period, are there things that you think the news industry could have been doing to better prepare itself for the future it now finds itself in?
I think there should have been a race to the top in terms of quality journalism, whatever people mean by quality journalism, which is pretty subjective. But we do know that the quality stuff does require trustworthy behavior as a prerequisite. And people could have been debating years ago some of the critical issues in journalistic ethics now. For example, one ethic is that it's more important to get the story right than to get it fast. Another area is 100 years ago, there was a big improvement in journalistic ethics called objectivity, which meant you showed both sides of the story. The problem there is that sometimes there are not two sides of a story, because you could bring two people in, but you're bringing in someone on one side who you know is going to lie because their job is to lie. And to present both sides as being equal, that's called false equivalence. Maybe we could have gotten a leap start on stopping false equivalence 10 years ago, and the world would be better. There's a lot of those things like that. The whole quality thing. There's an article written recently by Phoenix Salmon who says that the advertisers with money want to be associated and linked in with quality journalism. They don't want the gossipy stuff typically, and that might create an interesting bifurcation in the industry. The real money, I think, may go to to publications which produce quality journalism, whatever that is. And the rest of them may have to be happy with the kind of ads you see on late night cable TV. There's other factors too, by the way. I think we're going to see a la carte cable pricing. Personally, I'd love to see it because I want to be a cable cutter. And it's not clear how much people will pay for the news channels on cable.
I'd like to talk about that speed question just for another beat. So it's a value that is certainly one cherished in newsrooms and by journalists, but it's also one cherished by the consuming public. Can you imagine some kind of different equation where all of us come to settle for, we're going to stay off our Twitter for the next hour until we get the Boston Marathon, a little more right than we got it, or something like that? How do we get to that point where there's actually a market for journalists slowing down?
I'm not sure. It requires educating lots of consumers to know the issue, and I don't know if that in practice will happen. I'd be happy if enough journalistic institutions adopted some of these trustworthiness principles, and then they were ranked more highly, or tended to be ranked more highly, in news aggregators and so on. That's the most I can hope for. I guess I do have a lot of confidence in the American public if we're not lied to. And the deal is that though the pioneer in exposing a lot of that is Jon Stewart. He has a great piece called CNN Leaves It There, where a CNN reporter is interviewing a politician. The politician repeats something which has been repeatedly shown to be a lie over and over, and the reporter shows that he knows it visibly in his body language, but he says, well, we just got to leave it there. And you can imagine Mr. Stewart's response. Recently, in fact, I think it was Chuck Todd, at the last show for Meet the Press of last year, he had comedians on, including Louis Black, and basically what Chuck Todd admitted was that, sure, they're not going to ask tough questions of politicians because they want the politicians to come back on. Now, speaking naively as a news consumer, Chuck Todd just told me he doesn't want to do the job. And that leads to provocative thoughts like TV broadcast stations only earn their licenses by serving the public interest. So if they don't serve the public interest, and admittedly so, what happens? Because you know the FCC is feisty now. There's other stuff going on with news on TV. I do have hope. It's kind of a new hope, but I haven't found anything different or better than the Trust Project. If you know about it, let me know. In fact, since I may be leaving early today, I'm Craig at craigslist.org. This is not prematurely ending the session, but just so I remember, I'm Craig at craigslist.org or Craig Newmark on both Twitter and Facebook, and that I kind of suck at Facebook. And you're going to see an intolerable number of bird pictures on Facebook.
So on this notion of false equivalency, it grows out of, sort of a long established ethos in journalism about so-called objectivity or fairness, and it's been a predominant theme through generations of journalism. And you and I talked last week about one of my favorite examples. It's Linda Greenhouse, the Pulitzer Prize-winning Supreme Court reporter, formerly of the New York Times, who's written a lot about this. And one of her examples is the conversation and the reporting about, where was President Obama born? And these stories that, insisted on then quoting Donald Trump or somebody else saying, no, he wasn't, we believe he was born, as if that is supplying some form of objectivity or balance or fairness. So what's an organizing principle that's better than that, since that's not working?
What's been suggested by the professionals, and again, I'm respecting boundaries, is transparency. And for that matter, verification. What you do is you are transparent about where you found your information. You may link to the source and maybe expound on it a little bit more there if you want a shorter article. And I'm all for shorter articles. And then one of the kind of signals of trustworthiness that the trust people talk about are markers of what's been verified and not verified. Because, and this is being discussed still, but let's suppose in an article you make several big assertions upon which the whole article revolves. And of those big assertions, I'd like to see each one marked as having been verified, possibly with a link to the verification process. And in a case like that, if each one is verified, the whole article could be marked as verified. And that would help. That would help a lot from the news consumer point of view. It is extra work for the reporter. It's extra work for the copy editor and maybe the managing editor. But I would buy that newspaper. In fact, I would probably subscribe to it and maybe even make additional contributions, because there's not much like that now. Again, for general financial stuff, there's ProPublica and some related work from Columbia Journalism Review.
So there are a lot of journalists fundamentally doing their jobs the way you describe. What's the difference between the way that they're working, the way I worked as a reporter or an editor, and what you're positing?
Okay, to oversimplify in a somewhat unfair way, there are old school journalists who, in good faith, check facts, in good faith, cite original sources, in good faith, tell people what they verified or haven't verified. And that's pretty good. A problem there, though, is that the people who write the headline or the link, the link text, could turn that into link bait, and it's very common that the link bait, the title, says something very different than what's in the article. And I found that to be a common problem, at least in those fields which I know something about, particularly the internet industry. For a lot of writers, where the atmosphere in their news outlet is such that as long as it's plausible, you can publish it, then that's going to be a whole different kind of thing. There is always going to be markets for gossip because, it's accepted that there's no fact-checking there. They may make stuff up. It's the whole tabloid thing. And there's a range of tabloids from National Enquirer where, sure, they make stuff up and it's kind of fun for fans of that kind of stuff. And then there's tabloids online of different sorts. Some of the British papers are basically tabloids. And now on cable news, we now have tabloid-style news being delivered. One entire network is apparently being turned that way.
Anyone who follows your postings, your writings, sometimes on Twitter, Facebook, these short columns you do, you often begin by, I'm not a journalist, I'm not telling journalists what to do, this is not my profession, I'm just a news consumer. I'm really curious about those constant references to that, and how you think about this, the so-called citizen journalist, and this notion that anyone's a journalist, anyone can be a journalist. You seem to take a different tact in describing your thoughts about the industry, and I'm wondering why you do that.
Long question. So the disclosure is partly driven by being a nerd and being very literal about what I am. It's about respect. Journalism is a very difficult profession, and the demands for trustworthy behavior make it more so, because journalism is a profession, I think, like medicine or law, where you have to have a code of ethics which is hopefully enforced. Enforcement is always flawed, but at least it's a thing. And so I always qualify that, reminding people that I am in a very modest way representing a little bit of the news consumer community, saying that I don't want to be lied to. So I keep saying that and saying that, again, because of that mixture of respect and just real life observations. Because for 10 years now or so, I have been speaking to reporters and editors and journalists. I can see how difficult the job is. I can see how tempting it is to get something published before you verified it. The recent TV show, The Newsroom, Aaron Sorkin, like Jeff Jarvis, hated it because he knows how that thing really operates. I don't. All I saw that there were newsmen there trying to do things right. And that was great. And that's, I've seen some of the, now and then I get to see how some of the sausage is made, and I often see some disappointing behavior.
What are you currently reading?
I read a combination of news feeds, that relate to the business, and some of my favorite publications like Medium and Huffington Post and Verge sometimes. For surveys, in fact, for the serious stuff, I'll read Tech Meme, Media Gazer, and Memorandum. I also read the Neiman Report daily, and the one from the American Press Institute, and the one from techpresident.com. Aside from that, as part of the nerd code, most of the novels I read, and I'm running low, are science fiction and fantasy, historical mysteries, often cross-genre stuff, things of that nature. Yeah, I do. So I'm reading about 8 novels a month, and I, by the way, I love TV, and I do watch a fair amount of that. Yeah, I may need to get a better TV because the current 50-inch TV, my wife has mocked now as puny, and we should go bigger.
Do you imagine writing a book?
I'd like to, and I have some material, but I don't know if I have enough. I have to write down the ballet injury story, things like that, and I should save that for the book, assuming none of my injuries erupt now. Yeah, men will do really stupid things in their mid-20s, and of course mid-30s, 40s, 80s. You were saying?
I entirely forgot. I'm picturing the ballet injury. I don't even know.
One scar is visible, the other no one else gets to see except.
So perhaps we should invite Mrs. Newmark up to the stage. So when you talk about television, and we talked a little bit about this before, so you're watching things like the newsroom, but are you watching for news, or are you watching for entertainment?
Oh, well, if I'm watching the newsroom, I'm watching for both entertainment and something to be optimistic about. Because the newsroom was that had the optimistic message where trustworthy news can be done, but it's a struggle. And I also like a lot of the newsroom romances, which I know are totally unrealistic, but they were fun to watch, particularly that tie into Sex and the City.
So beyond the newsroom, though,
Okay.
are you watching for news? Do you tune on or into anything for news consumption?
I'll sometimes watch BBC World News on the TV. Most of the time I'm listening to public radio in different forms. I listen to NPR, KQED back home, WNYC in New York, WAMU in Washington. I couldn't figure out the public station here. And I also listen to Night Vale Public Radio, which is basically public radio in the Twilight Zone. And that's, if you like podcasts at all, or The Twilight Zone, I'd recommend that podcast.
So we talked, I mentioned this thing that you wrote and this notion that you had about...
For the Night Vale fans, briny depths. I repeat, briny depths. You were saying?
Once again, I forgot. No, you had this list of things you've taken on, activities to organize your philanthropic life. And when you measure your work in journalism against the other areas you took on, veterans, women in tech, a few others, how do you see that progress? And do you imagine staying attentive to this? Or do you look at it and say, I'm not having sufficient impact, I might turn my focus someplace else?
Well, yeah, the deal is that I will plug away until people around me, people smarter than me, until they convince me that, well, either it's not having any impact, let's redirect those resources. They may tell me this is having significant impact, but here's someone else doing it better, and I may throw my support behind them. That would be pretty good. And it's conceivable that something may have the impact that I wanted, and that could do the job. That's possible in the veterans, women's veterans, military family space. It's hard to say because there's 40,000 groups in that space right now, many of which are actually defunct or ineffective. That could wind up operating well in a decade, maybe. But see, while I'm doing this, I'm also spending a lot of time in official Washington, mostly Veterans Affairs, but also FCC, Small Business Administration, a little bit of Federal Elections Commission and others, Department of State. I'm learning how government can actually run better, and that's a long discussion, but a lot of it is just to show feds the respect that they've already earned. Some of them have screwed up and very badly, but and they want to do better, they know how to do better, but it's usually regulation, law, the Congress getting in the way of them doing better. So you will see from me tweets or a Facebook post where I use a hashtag that says respect for feds, with the 4 being a numeral. But the deal is that basically on a continuous basis, feds of all sorts get shit on all the time. It's contributed greatly to the toxic atmosphere in Washington, aside from the political one. The deal is Fed workers tend not to trust anyone in the press because they expect the press to hear what they have to say and then probably or possibly spin it into something ugly. And so that's why people in agencies are unlikely to tell people the truth. I need to take advantage of something, the social capital I have, because as far as I could tell, most staffers in Washington found their place to live or furniture or something on Craigslist. So I have some social capital and trust. So they'll talk to me. I just don't know what to do with that trust. I need to figure out how to do that kind of thing. I do want to give special credit to the younger, the newer staffers on Congressional Hill, because these are people who are not paid enough to eat, and yet they're overworked. And what they do is they become hunter-gatherers. They descend on fundraisers where there are always, cheese platters, vegetable platters, and I'm telling them that many of them are malnourished, but they should focus on the vegetable platters, not the delicious cheese platters. And I toy with the idea of putting up an article in Politico about that. You were saying?
I was saying it has been a great pleasure to be your straight man today. Nice to be with you.